The sound of my own gasp was swallowed by his roar. When my son-in-law, Mark, shoved me, it was with the impersonal disgust of a man clearing an obstacle from his path. My hip, still tender from the pneumonia that had ravaged my body weeks earlier, buckled instantly. I collapsed onto the cold, unforgiving tile of his immaculate Boston kitchen, the sharp pain shooting up my leg eclipsed only by the sudden, bright agony in my shoulder as it struck the base of the gleaming, stainless steel refrigerator. He yelled that I was a useless old woman, that I couldn't even be trusted to stir a simple risotto correctly, that the texture was ruined. Through the doorway, in the soft light of the living room, I could see my daughter, Clara. She sat frozen on the beige sofa, her gaze fixed on the television, her entire body rigid in a desperate, practiced performance of not hearing, not seeing. What neither of them knew, what Mark in his petty rage and Clara in her terrified paralysis could not possibly imagine, was that the thin, cream-colored envelope resting in my apron pocket, a letter from a bank I had never heard of, had already changed the molecules in the room. It held a secret that would not just alter my destiny, but theirs. And as I lay on that sterile floor, staring up at the man who despised me and the daughter who had abandoned me, a cold, quiet smile bloomed deep inside my chest. The game, I realized, had just begun. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 70 years old. For the past 2 decades, ever since my husband, Arthur, passed suddenly from an aneurysm, I had lived a life of quiet sufficiency in our small, weathered farmhouse in the hills of Vermont. It was a life I had built with my own hands. I tended the gardens Arthur had planted, I managed the modest finances he had left, and I prided myself on my independence. It was there I had raised Clara, our only child, instilling in her the values of strength and self-respect I believed were our family's bedrock. I thought I had taught her to be strong. I was wrong. Everything changed 3 months ago with the pneumonia. It came on fast and brutal, leaving me hospitalized for 2 weeks and, upon my release, terrifyingly weak. The doctor was firm, stating I could not be alone for at least 2 months. That was when Clara insisted I come stay with her and Mark in Boston. Her voice on the phone was a frantic buzz of concern, a daughter's love pulling me toward the city. "It will just be temporary, Mom. Just until you get your strength back," she had pleaded. "And you know how much Mark loves your cooking. You can help out a bit. We miss you." I had hesitated. A deep, instinctual tremor warned me against it. My relationship with Mark, a fast-talking real estate broker with eyes that never seemed to settle, had always been polite but distant. He was a man who valued shiny surfaces, and I was all worn wood and faded flannel. But the thought of being an invalid, alone in the Vermont winter, was a more immediate fear, and this was my daughter, my Clara, asking for me. I packed 2 suitcases and left the home I had not slept a night away from in 20 years. Their apartment was on the 12th floor of a glass tower overlooking the harbor, a sterile expanse of white walls, gray furniture, and cold marble countertops. It felt less like a home and more like a showroom, a place where no object was ever out of place, including, as I would soon learn, me. The guest room was small, but I was grateful. The first week was peaceful. I was still weak, sleeping most of the day, my movements limited to the bed and the ensuite bathroom. Mark was conspicuously charming, bringing me trays of tea I hadn't asked for, calling me Eleanor, with a practiced warmth that sat ill on him. Clara seemed relieved, fluttering around me, fluffing pillows, her face bright with the performance of a dutiful daughter. But as my strength returned, the dynamic shifted. It began subtly. Mark would note, with a tight smile, that the dishwasher hadn't been emptied. He would ask if I could perhaps wipe down the counters since I was already in the kitchen. Soon, these polite requests vanished, replaced by a silent, crushing weight of expectation. My physical therapy exercises, meant to rebuild the strength in my lungs and legs, became an inconvenience, slotted between his laundry, the vacuuming, and the preparation of their elaborate nightly meals. I had not come to Boston as a mother recovering from illness. I had come as unpaid staff. I tried to speak to Clara one evening, finding her alone in the living room as she scrolled through her phone. "This isn't what we agreed upon," I said softly, my hands aching from scrubbing the grout in their glass shower. "I feel like I've become Mark's housekeeper." Clara did not look up. Her thumb froze on the screen. That familiar, painful shadow crossed her face, the same look she'd had as a teenager when she knew she was in the wrong, but refused to admit it. "Mom, you know how Mark is," she murmured. "He's just very particular. He's under a lot of stress at work. Please, don't make things difficult. It's just for a few more weeks." A few more weeks became 2 months. My recovery was complete, but any mention of my returning to Vermont was met with Clara's panicked evasions or Mark's cold logic. "Why rush back? The winter is brutal there. You're helpful here." His version of helpful was servitude. Nothing I did was ever right. The coffee was too weak. The floors weren't clean enough. The shirts I ironed had creases that were, in his words, an embarrassment. And Clara, my bright, strong-willed daughter, simply evaporated. She became a ghost in her own home, her eyes perpetually averted, her laughter thin and brittle. She had erected a fortress of silence around herself, and I was left outside to face her husband's escalating tyranny alone. Which brought me to that afternoon. I was making a saffron risotto, a dish Arthur and I had perfected together. I was stirring the arborio rice, letting it absorb the chicken broth slowly, when Mark entered the kitchen. He had been in his home office all day, the muffled sounds of his angry phone calls, a tense soundtrack to my chores. He looked into the pot and his face contorted in a mask of theatrical disgust. "What is that?" "It's risotto," I replied, my voice tighter than I intended. "For dinner. That's not risotto." He sneered, dipping a spoon in and tasting it. "It's mush. The color is completely wrong." "You've ruined it." I took a deep breath, the smell of saffron and parmesan filling my lungs. "Mark, I have been making this dish since before you were born. It is perfectly fine." His reaction was terrifyingly swift. The politeness he wore like a cheap suit vanished, revealing the raw, ugly rage beneath. His face flushed, a deep, mottled red. "You don't know how to do anything right, you old, incompetent woman." "It's all wrong." He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into the thin skin above my elbow, and yanked me away from the stove. The shove was a continuation of that yank. I lost my balance, my legs still not as steady as I liked, and I went down. Clara's voice from the doorway was thin, a reedy whisper of a protest. "Mark, what happened?" "She fell," he snapped, not even looking at her. He was already stirring the risotto himself, adding more broth with violent splashes. "You know how clumsy she is." Lying on the floor, the pain in my shoulder radiating down to my fingertips, I looked at my daughter. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw her terror, her shame, and her choice. She looked away, turning her gaze to the floor, her body trembling, and she said nothing, absolutely nothing. The physical pain was a dull throb, a distant signal. The true wound was in my soul. It was the profound, searing agony of abandonment. The daughter I had nursed through fevers, whose heartbreaks I had mended, whose college education I had funded by selling my mother's jewelry after Arthur died, had just watched her husband assault me and chosen silence. Slowly, using the refrigerator handle, I pulled myself up. I did not stagger. I would not give him the satisfaction. I walked out of the kitchen, past my daughter who still refused to look at me, and went to my room. I locked the door. I sat on the edge of the small, uncomfortable bed, the entire room seeming to pulse with my heartbeat. That was when I saw it. The envelope had arrived in the morning mail, addressed to me, Mrs. Eleanor Vance. The return address was for the Consolidated Trust Bank, a name I didn't recognize. I had slipped it into my apron, thinking it was just sophisticated junk mail. With hands that trembled from rage, not weakness, I tore it open. It was a letter, thick and formal, from a man named Mr. Harrison, a senior trust officer. He wrote that he was the executor of a private trust established by my late husband, Arthur. He had been trying to locate me for some time and had finally found my whereabouts through a property tax forwarding address. The letter continued, its dry, legal language slowly painting an impossible picture. Arthur, my quiet, unassuming husband, a man I believed had left behind only the farmhouse and a modest pension, had been a secret and brilliant investor. He had built a portfolio, primarily in nascent technology stocks in the early 90s, a portfolio that had been quietly compounding for over $2,000 in a blind trust. A second, smaller envelope was tucked inside. It was a handwritten letter from Arthur. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, his familiar, elegant script blurring through my sudden tears. "If you are reading this, it means I am long gone, and you have found yourself in a position of need. I kept this from you, not out of mistrust, but out of love. I knew your strength. I knew you would build your own life, on your own terms, and I never wanted this money to be a crutch. I wanted it to be a shield. If you are reading this, it means you need a shield. Use it, my love. Use it to be safe." I turned back to the bank's letter, my eyes scanning for the number. My breath caught in my throat. The trust's current value was just over $8.2 million. And then, a final paragraph. The trust was managed through a holding company, Beacon Hill Properties, which held several real estate assets. This included, the letter noted, the title deed for a condominium at his wife's current address of residence, Unit 12B. I read the sentence 3 times. This apartment, this cold white prison where I was treated like a servant, the floor I had just been thrown onto, it was mine. Arthur had bought it, perhaps as an investment, perhaps as a future home for Clara, and I now owned it. They were tenants, my tenants. I sat there, the letters in my lap, and the pain in my shoulder faded, the humiliation evaporated. In its place, a cold, diamond-hard clarity settled over me. I thought of Mark's sneer, of Clara's averted eyes. I thought of the endless, thankless chores, the casual cruelty, the crushing disrespect. I wiped the single tear from my cheek. I stood up, walked to the small mirror, and looked at myself. The woman staring back was not a victim. She was a landlord, and she was about to deliver an eviction notice. The next morning, I woke before the sunrise. My shoulder was a constellation of purple and blue, a painful but useful reminder. I moved with deliberate quiet, dressing in my best, and only, decent wool suit. I applied a touch of the lipstick I hadn't used in months. When I entered the kitchen, Mark was already there, tapping angrily at his laptop at the island. He grunted when he saw me but didn't look up. I prepared his coffee, exactly as he liked it, black with 1 sweetener, and placed it beside him. I made toast. I was the perfect, invisible servant. Clara emerged, her eyes puffy, dark circles under them. She flinched when she saw me, her gaze darting to my face, perhaps looking for a bruise, then quickly away. "Mom, are you okay this morning?" Her voice was a guilty whisper. "I am perfectly fine, dear," I replied, my voice smooth as glass. I poured her coffee. "I have some errands to run today, so I won't be here to make dinner." Mark's head snapped up. "Errands? What errands?" "Just some personal matters to attend to," I said, gathering my purse. "I'm sure you two can manage for one evening." Before either of them could protest, I was out the door. I did not take a taxi. I used a car service app on my phone, summoning a black sedan. I directed it to the address of Consolidated Trust Bank. The lobby was all marble and hushed reverence. I was escorted immediately to the top floor, to the office of Mr. Harrison. He was an older gentleman, kind-eyed but all business. "Mrs. Vance," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "We are so very glad to have finally made contact. Your husband was a remarkable man. He left very specific instructions. For the next 2 hours, he walked me through the portfolio. It was vast, and I was the sole beneficiary. I signed signature cards. I was given a new checkbook, a debit card, and a platinum credit card. We then discussed Beacon Hill Properties. He confirmed it. The holding company, which I now controlled, owned 4 properties in Boston. The largest was Unit 12B, currently leased well below market value to a Clara and Mark Jennings. "Is there a property manager?" I asked. "Yes, a firm called Boston Realty Management. They handle the leasing and maintenance." "Mr. Harrison?" I said, my voice steady. I would like you to arrange a meeting for me with them this afternoon. And I need you to do one more thing. I need you to transfer all authority for that holding company to me, personally, effective immediately. By noon, I was not Eleanor Vance, the unwanted guest. I was the president of Beacon Hill Properties. My next stop was not the apartment. It was the Copley Plaza Hotel. I booked a suite overlooking the square. I told the concierge I had arrived without my luggage and would need assistance. For the next 3 hours, I used the new credit card. I went to Saks and bought 2 new suits, silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, and a proper winter coat. I bought new shoes with a solid, low heel. I went to a high-end salon and had my hair cut and styled, the gray shaped into an elegant, sharp bob. I looked in the mirror and saw the woman Arthur had married, the woman who had run a farm and raised a child and faced the world head-on. She had been dormant. Now, she was awake. Back in my hotel suite, I ordered room service, a perfectly cooked steak. As I ate, I made the call. A man with a brusque voice answered. Boston Realty Management. I am calling about Unit 12B at the Harborview Tower, I said. This is Eleanor Vance, the new owner of record for Beacon Hill Properties. There was a pause. Oh yes, Mrs. Vance. We received the notification from the bank? A pleasure. How can we help you? I want you to draw up a new lease agreement for that unit, effective the 1st of next month, I said calmly, taking a bite of steak. I want it to reflect the full, current market rate. The man paused again. Ma'am, that would be, let me check. That would be a near 300% increase. The current tenants are on a legacy rate. I am aware. The new rate stands. Please have the notice delivered to them tomorrow morning. But, ma'am, that's highly irregular. That is my decision, I interrupted, my voice leaving no room for argument. Send me a copy of the notice at this email address. I gave him the new one I had created. And one more thing. What is your policy on late payments? 3-day grace period, then a 5% of rent late fee, and eviction proceedings begin on the 15th. Excellent, I said. Please enforce that policy, to the letter. I hung up and finished my wine. That night, I slept in a king-sized bed with 1,000 thread-count sheets. It was the first truly restful sleep I'd had in months. The call from Clara came the next evening. She was hysterical. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Mom, where are you? We've been so worried. I'm perfectly fine, Clara. I'm at a hotel. A hotel? With what money? Mom, you won't believe what happened. This crazy landlord, the company that owns the apartment, they just sent us a rent increase. It's thousands of dollars. It's impossible. Mark is going insane. He's in the office, trying to find a lawyer. He says it's illegal. Is it? I asked, admiring my new manicure. It sounds like they are simply adjusting to the market rate. Market rate? He called it predatory. Mom, we can't afford this. We'll be ruined. What are we going to do? Her voice was cracking, a raw panic I hadn't heard since she was a teenager. That does sound like a terrible problem, I said, my voice cool and distant. Perhaps you and Mark should look for a more affordable place to live. But we live here. This is our home. Mom, you're not helping. Why are you being like this? I let the silence stretch. Clara, I said, my voice hardening just a fraction. Do you remember yesterday when your husband threw me to the floor? Do you remember how you sat there and watched? Coldness, my dear, is a lesson I learned in your kitchen. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a dinner reservation. I hung up the phone. The next 2 weeks were a precise, calculated education. I did not return to the apartment. I moved from the hotel into a fully furnished, high-end rental in Beacon Hill, a beautiful brownstone apartment. I hired a lawyer, a sharp woman who specialized in tenant disputes and corporate law. On the 1st of the month, as expected, no rent was paid for Unit 12B. On the 2nd, Boston Realty Management, at my direction, delivered a formal notice to pay or quit. Clara called me, sobbing. Mark had been furious. He had thrown his laptop against the wall. He was drinking. He kept demanding to know where I was, what I was doing, where I had gotten money. He's obsessed, Mom, she whispered, clearly hiding in a closet. He thinks you're doing this. He thinks you somehow found a way to do this to us. What a ridiculous notion, I replied. I'm just an old woman. How could I possibly have anything to do with your landlord? He's demanding I get the money from you. He says you must have some of Dad's old savings. My heart seized. Is he hurting you, Clara? There was a long pause, filled with a choked-back sob. He grabbed my arm. He shook me. But he didn't hit me. Not really. Mom, please, just tell me where you are. I can't pay this. He says it's all my fault. This was the moment. The abuse, once directed at me, had now turned, as it always does, to the person closest. Listen to me, Clara. I am going to send a car to your building. It will be at the front entrance in 10 minutes. Pack a small bag with your essentials. Your wallet, your passport, any medication. Leave your phone, leave everything else. Just walk out the front door and get in the car. But Mark, he will be home any minute. Then you had better be fast. I hung up. I waited in the lobby of my new building. 10 minutes passed. 15, 20. My stomach was a knot of ice. Had I misjudged? Had she chosen him again? Then, the black car pulled up. The door opened, and Clara stumbled out. She was pale, trembling, and carrying nothing but her purse. But she was there. I met her at the door and pulled her inside, holding her as she collapsed against me. The dry, racking sobs of a person who had been holding her breath for years. You're safe, I told her, stroking her hair. You are finally safe. That night, I told her everything. I laid out the bank statements. I showed her Arthur's letter. I told her about the holding company, about the ownership of the apartment. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief, horror, and a dawning, terrible understanding. You, she whispered, the rent increase, the notices, that was all you. Yes, I said. He pushed me, I continued, my voice quiet but unyielding. And you let him. I needed you to see, Clara. I needed you to see what happens when the money is threatened, when the control is lost. I needed you to see the real man you married. And, I added, I needed to see if my daughter was still in there, the one I raised. She looked at me, her face crumbling. He told me you were clumsy. He told me I was overreacting. He said I was lucky to have him, that no one else would want me, that I was weak. You are many things, Clara, I said, taking her hand. But you are not weak. You are Arthur Vance's daughter. And you are my daughter. You just forgot. The final act came a week later. Mark had been served with a formal eviction summons. He had, of course, refused to leave. He had changed the locks, barricading himself inside my apartment. My lawyer informed me that the final step was a physical eviction by a sheriff's deputy. I told her to schedule it, but I would be attending. And I'm coming with you, Clara said, her voice small but firm. We stood in the hallway of the 12th floor, flanked by my lawyer, 2 sheriff's deputies, and a locksmith. The deputy knocked, a hard, official rap. Mark Jennings. We have a court order to reclaim this property. Open the door. We heard a muffled roar from inside. Go to hell. This is my home. The deputy nodded to the locksmith, who began drilling the lock. The door swung open to reveal a scene of utter chaos. The apartment was a wreck. Trash was everywhere. Empty liquor bottles littered the floor. And in the middle of it all stood Mark, unshaven, wearing a dirty bathrobe, his face a mask of defiant rage. Get out, he screamed. You can't do this, Mr. Jennings, the deputy said calmly. The apartment is no longer yours. You need to vacate the premises. He saw me then, standing behind the officers. You, he hissed, his eyes narrowing to slits. This is you. You did this, you old witch. You poisoned my wife. His wife, I replied, stepping forward so he could see me clearly. Clara, would you like to say hello? Clara stepped out from behind me. Her face was calm. Her hands were not shaking. Mark's jaw dropped. Clara? "Baby, what are you doing with her? She's crazy. She's trying to ruin us. Come here." Clara took a step forward, and I felt a moment of panic, but she stopped just outside the doorway. "No, Mark, I'm not coming here. I'm not going anywhere with you. Ever again. You ungrateful. After everything I've given you, this apartment, this life, this apartment?" I said, my voice cutting through his tirade. He turned his rage-filled eyes back to me. "This apartment, Mark, belongs to me. It has always belonged to my family. You were a guest, a tenant who assaulted his landlord. And now, your lease is terminated." The color drained from his face. The deputy stepped forward. "Sir, you can pack one bag. The rest of your belongings will be itemized and stored." He looked from me to Clara and back, the entire foundation of his world crumbling. He had no power. The money was gone. The wife was gone. The apartment was gone. He was nothing. He lunged, not at me, but at Clara. "You will regret this," he roared. Before he could take 2 steps, the deputies had him, pinning his arms behind his back with practiced efficiency. As they led him away, handcuffed, he was still screaming, a pathetic, desperate sound that echoed down the polished hallway. We stood in the doorway of the ruined apartment. The stench of stale alcohol and defeat hung in the air. Clara looked at the mess, the physical manifestation of the life she had just escaped. What do we do now?" she whispered. I put my arm around her shoulder. "Now," I said, turning her away from the wreckage, "we go home." In the months that followed, Clara truly came back to life. It was a slow process, like a garden coming back after a hard frost. She started therapy to unpack the years of Mark's insidious, corrosive abuse. She re-enrolled in school, finishing the art history degree she had abandoned when she met him. We sold the Boston apartment, its surfaces scrubbed and repainted, washing away the last physical traces of Mark. We did not return to Vermont. We bought a beautiful, light-filled house in Cambridge, one with a garden in the back for me and an art studio for her. We used Arthur's money, the shield he had left for us, to build a new life, but we both knew the lesson. The money had been the weapon, the tool, the key. But the strength to use it, the strength to walk out that door, that had come from us. We established the Arthur's Shield Foundation, a fund dedicated to providing legal aid and emergency housing for women and elderly individuals trapped in abusive situations. Clara ran it. She had found her calling, her voice, by helping others find theirs. Sometimes, in the evening, we sit in the garden, and I watch her. She is strong, confident, and whole. The fall on that cold kitchen floor felt like an ending, but it wasn't. It was a beginning. It was the moment a 70-year-old woman and her 45-year-old daughter finally, truly, learned to stand up. Dignity, I realized, is not something given. It is something taken back. And true strength is not about never falling. It's about what you do when you rise.